Let's switch gears here to the Bengals side of things. Skinny, it's a big week for Joe Burrow. He did his media tour and went on the Pardon My Take podcast, and he answered a series of mostly silly questions with those guys. He also did an interview with Complex Sports. One of the things that the Pardon My Take guys hit on was Burrow's added strength. The quarterback said he's put on 10 to 15 pounds since last year. I think you guys have talked to him a little bit about the working out he's done. But just seems like this was a reiteration of he's really put in a lot of work since he hasn't been able to do all the throwing and football stuff that he normally would during the rehab. He's really put a significant focus on the weightlifting side of things.
Yeah, he talked about some of that at the last press conference we had with him, and the fact that he was able to do most of his normal workouts while he couldn't throw, and I think that's always been a goal of his. Don't forget that year he had the appendicitis. He lost weight and looked kind of gone. And it was hard for him. Once the season starts, it's hard to put weight on. And I think that's always been a goal of his, is to get a little bit bigger and stronger in order to handle some of the stuff in the pocket. You look at him, it's funny. He doesn't look it right. He's 6'4", and it's legit. I mean, when you're next to him in person, you're like, damn, he's pretty tall, but he never has looked thick. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. So probably 10 or 15 pounds won't even look that noticeable, but I guess for him, it's going to feel noticeable, and it is something that's been a goal of his to do.
Yeah, I think coming back from the appendix surgery too, he had looked thinner at that point, and he definitely looks much thicker and filled out since then. They also hit on the idea of Burrow being forgotten about in the NFL top quarterbacks conversation, and Burrow agreed with them. He said, if you're not out there and people aren't watching you, then there's nothing to talk about. I'm going to give people something to talk about this year I'm excited about. And that last part of the quote, people really ran with and made a big deal out of. Joe saying, oh, he's going to give people something to talk about this year. I watched the interview. I'll be honest, the way he said that was not as like cocky or arrogant as people are making it sound. It almost sounded more of like, good or bad, I'll be playing, so there will be comments about my play. It wasn't as much about like, I'm going to go dominate everybody. What did you take from this, if anything?
Yeah. I think for him, though, it's like any great athlete. You need something, right? You need whatever nugget that is to inspire you, to drive you. He's a pretty self-driven guy. We've seen that he was a pretty driven guy even at Ohio State, trying to become a starter. And he's even talked about it. He said, if you remember, we talked about the injury stuff and him trying to fight back through injuries and sometimes to his detriment. And he said, yeah, part of my MO has always been hard work. I've always that's kind of what's got me to where I'm at, is to outwork people. And I think for him saying that, it's him just giving him just a little bit of extra drive, whatever that may be. He may not even need it, but listen, every athlete does. I mean, Michael Jordan would perceive things and perceive slights. And I mean, all those guys do that, that are at the top of the game. But to his point, it is funny. I saw, and trust me when I say this guy is not exactly the bastion of brains, for goodness sakes. But Tyreek Hill, the Dolphins wide receiver, was asked to list, I don't even know what the hell it was on, his top 5 quarterbacks in the game today. Somehow Baker Mayfield made that list. Don't ask me how Baker made the top 5 quarterbacks, and Joe Burrow didn't. And I think to that point, you're kind of out of sight, out of mind a little bit. You've seen some recent quarterback rankings probably where you expect to see him like 2 or 3, and he's like, 5, 6, or 7. And I get it. Again, when you're out of the eye and you're not on the field and other guys are out there performing, probably slipping some of those things. But all I know is when the guys finished 2 seasons healthy, they went to a Super Bowl and went to an AFC championship game. He makes a difference.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And I think from the standpoint of whether like he's actually viewing this as a slight or anything, he doesn't need it. But like you said, these guys will use anything. So absolutely, when he sees himself being ranked 5th, 6th, 7th in the NFL in terms of the quarterback rankings, he's going to use that as motivation. He's going to be thinking about that. But again, he's a guy that's incredibly driven already and already going to work hard. And it's not something that's ever really a concern with someone like him. There was another part of the interview that created a little bit of controversy, and that was when they asked him about the schedule going to 18 games. And again, he did not just like bring this up and say the NFL should do it. They asked him about the 18-game schedule, and he mentioned that there should be 2 bye weeks.
Yeah, dude, I asked him about that 2 months ago, and we all wrote stories about it, and we asked players about it, and players all said, yeah, we need 2 bye weeks if we're going to do this. And suddenly Chase Daniel makes it seem like this is some new news that came out. Good God almighty.
Exactly right. So Burrow's thing was 2 bye weeks. One of them should be week 13 for the entire NFL, and they package NFL Pro Bowl festivities into that to
that's not going to happen. But yeah, he brought that up with us too, and I thought it was very super interesting at the time. It was 2 months ago.
Right. And also the other part of that, which we had talked about at the time, was how it falls in line with the Super Bowl would then be the Sunday before President's Day. So everyone would get that next day off. And so a lot of people are like, hey, great idea, just like we did at the time when he brought it up to you guys. But this time it made national headlines because on Pardon My Take, and former NFL quarterback Chase Daniel saw the comments and tweeted that he guarantees every NFL player seeing Burrow's comments is not happy with them. There was a linebacker from the Lions that agreed with that take and got in. Not a lot of people jumping on that bandwagon, but clearly some who are criticizing Burrow for these comments. Are they right? Do they have a leg to stand on here?
No, listen. I don't think they should go to 18 games. I don't. But that has been floated. So that's how the question has been. That's how I asked the question to Burrow. And he, I said, I think I even phrased it is 2 bye weeks if they don't have it a non-starter, and he gave a great answer to it, kind of similar to this answer, and then came up with hey, maybe they do something, instead of the Pro Bowl, you do one of those bye weeks is an All-Star week like the NBA, and I'm like, well, that's not going to happen, but okay, you're at least thinking outside the box. I'll give you some credit for that. So then I went and asked a couple players. Mike Hilton's a veteran. Then I asked Ted Karras, who's the team player rep, and they literally both said, yeah, it'd be a lot, but they want to give us an extra week of game checks. I'm not going to say no to it, and I think that's what's going to come down to. You're not going to pay them for a 17-week season in 18 games. You're going to have to pay for an extra game. There's going to have to be more in salary and compensation to the players, and I guarantee you the owners know that. If the players vote for it, they know that's what they're going to get out of this.
Yeah. Now, from an NFL Players Association standpoint, I completely understand that if you're trying to fight against having an 18-game schedule and this topic keeps coming up, the question keeps getting asked, and players are talking about it already as if it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to happen, that does chip away at your negotiating power. I completely understand that. But guess what? That's not Joe Burrow's job. That's not all these other players' job. And we live in this isn't other businesses. This is sports and entertainment where they're going to get interviewed constantly, and we're going to ask them direct questions about this stuff. They can't just avoid it nonstop or say we're never going to play an 18-game schedule. I have no problem with Joe giving a thoughtful answer like this and giving you a legit, he had thought it out and put something together that was reasonable, and he's not clamoring for having an 18-game schedule. He probably doesn't want it, but he was willing to give you an answer to it, and I think there's nothing wrong with that.
I agree. And again, it feels inevitable. They can, when they come to the collective bargaining process of this or the discussion of this, because it'll probably get pushed or try to get pushed before the next collective bargaining agreement in 2030. If players feel that it's inevitable, they believe it's going to happen, then they want the next bargaining part of that as, hey, if you're going to do this, A, I want an extra game check, which is going to have to happen. And B, there's got to be a second bye week. Okay, that's perfectly logically fine. It wasn't Joe Burrow going, I wish we played 18 games, and if we do, yeah, I'd probably like to have a second bye week. And no, there was an answer to a question for the second time in 2 months, and he answered it the same way, and I thought very thoughtfully. And so did the players I went to in the locker room right after that to add to the story. The player rep in Ted Karras and Mike Hilton, a veteran who's been through this, and they both said, listen, it's a lot. I mean, 18, and it is. I mean, 17's a lot. Hell, 16 is a lot. Whatever number you want to put to, it's a lot. And there's going to have to be give and take. The give for the NFL is, or the take for the NFL is, they get an extra regular season game out of this. You also will lose a preseason game, so there's still a 20-game schedule. Again, the regular season game is the meaningful game, but it does add another game check. That's part of the negotiation process, and it does add another bye week potentially, which would be part of the negotiation process. What's wrong with that?
The difference for Burrow and some of his teammates, the other guys who have talked about it, is they're living in reality. They understand that this is coming. We see what you're doing. We see how greedy you've been with this type of stuff. You're going to make us play 18 games. Sure. Here's how we'd like to do it. And, the Chase Daniel and maybe an NFL player rep or something is going to say, just don't say that at all. Don't say anything about 18-game schedule. It's that's just not reality.
I can't. I don't remember who he's doing the podcast with, but I think Chase Daniel's actually co-hosting a new podcast. So Chase Daniel wants his name out there. Listen, Chase Daniel doesn't know anything about a 17-week or 16-week schedule because all he did was stand on the damn sidelines his whole career. I mean, what do you know about it, guy?
Great point. You're in the midst of doing positional analysis for the Bengals roster at local12.com. Everyone can find that there. You've done quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends to this point, at least, that have been published. I've got to say, your write-up on the tight ends has gotten me a little bit fired up as a Bengal fan. Should it have? Am I looking at that wrong?
No, it's funny. Listen, that's been the position that everybody's been wringing their hands over since Zach Taylor's come here, right? Of why can't they upgrade why didn't they draft Obviously, the Laporta draft, I'm not going to relitigate it. Those that say that you're not wrong, okay? In the short term, he was the guy they should have picked instead of Miles Murphy. I get that. They had a plan. Tight end was not part of the plan. But last year, that was the most receptions Bengals tight ends have had since Zach Taylor's been here. They caught 88 passes as a collective group. Now, in fairness, some of that was Drew Sample out of the backfield as a check down receiver, but he's still listed as a tight end technically. So they had the most receptions ever. And so you've brought the leading receiver from last year's group in Tanner Hudson back, the second leading receiver in Drew Sample back. You've added Mike Gesicki, who, again, he's probably not where he was at the height of his Miami career, but he's not all that far removed from a 3-year span in Miami of averaging about 65 catches a year for about 650 yards. And again, playing in an offense where the tight end is single covered 98.7% of the time because of what you're trying to do to the guys on the outside and the things you can do with Mike Gesicki. And, oh, by the way, then you also did spend 2 draft picks at that position. So it's the deepest they've had. You can do there's a lot of different skill sets you can do. The unfortunate part is none of these guys, other than the potential rookies, probably Eric All, and he may wind up starting the year on the injured list because he's coming off of knee surgery from last year. The funny part is none of these guys are like 3-down guys because, Drew Sample, while he did play on 3rd down, it was in that blocking back role. And maybe that's the role again for him this year. Maybe they say, hey, it worked out so well for us last year there. We're going to use you again in that role. But Tanner Hudson is not a great inline blocker because he played mostly a flexed out receiver in college. Gesicki's really more of a flexed out receiver and not an inline blocker. So you don't really have that 3-down guy, but you have a lot of different things you can do with these tight ends, in my opinion.
Any other thoughts on the Bengals or those positional analysis?
Nope. I got wide receivers today, offensive line tomorrow. Then next week, I will dive into the defense, the specialists. And then at the end of the week on Friday, I will have the final 53-player roster projection.
There you go.
You can always get local stories right here on YouTube, but go ahead and hit that subscribe button to get notifications to stay in the know.